video games have come a long way since the likes of Pong and Space Invaders, with technological advancements making games appear far slicker and more professional across the board, regardless of whether they came from a multi-million-dollar development studio or a single guy or girl in their bedroom. The days of polygonal or 8-bit games are pretty much over, barring purposeful design choices of course, and there are ever-changing trends when it comes to gaming genres too. However, today we want to focus on specifics, the particular video game mechanics that have vanished along with them, rather than out-of-fashion genres as a whole. Many of the following have disappeared for good reason, perhaps because they only ever existed in the first place due to technological limitations, while others will be sorely missed, so prepare to pour one out for a fallen friend or two, because I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are 10 old video game features lost to time. Number 10. Mid-level loading screens. Yeah, don't worry, we're starting with one that won't be missed by many. While loading screens between stages still exist in many games, any loading that takes place within one level now tends to be disguised by a slow lift or perhaps an awkward shuffle through a narrow crevice. Once upon a time though, games such as Banjo-Kazooie had to be a bit more brazen in how they broke up single levels into smaller rooms in order to keep the overall world design suitably complex and interesting. Rather than just feature tiny one-room levels that the console would be able to handle without melting into a puddle, games dared to include large, sprawling stages by dividing them up into manageable chunks that were loaded in room by room. Now, as we've said, loading screens themselves aren't quite a thing of the past yet, but they tend to be reserved these days for where a more significant change in location is taking place. Marvel's Spider-Man, for example, will hit you with a splash screen when you enter a building, but there's no such loading when swinging through a life-size rendering of Manhattan. Pretty impressive when you compare it to the days of old. Props of course though to all the retro titles that were hiding their loading way back when, from Final Fantasy VII's combat encounters that just seem like a stylistic choice despite the fact that they are indeed hiding the loading, to Haven Call of the King's clever use of cutscenes meaning you're completely unaware of any loading from start to finish. Well done. Number 9. Cheat codes. Cheat codes are strangely named because they aren't actually cheating, if you think about it, spoken like a true cheater. What I mean though is that these codes exist in the game for a reason, usually put in there by developers to have fun with, rather than to get any sort of upper hand on another player. Granted, some make the single-player campaign easier, with invulnerability, unlimited ammo, or unlocking rewards early, but others are less practical, such as big head modes, silly physics effects, and alternate skins. While you might still find the odd cheat menu these days, often home to fun features you unlocked in-game legitimately, it's very rare indeed to find a new release that allows you to log on to cheatplanet.com, rest in peace, in order to scribble down a string of controller inputs onto a dog-eared piece of notepad paper that's going to live in your game box for the next 5 years. Ah, good times. Number 8. Tutorial levels. Call of Duty's shooting ranges, Half-Life's army training camp, and Barbie Explorer's laser room all acted as tutorial levels that allowed you to work out all of the controls from the safety of a simulation before throwing you into the hell of level 1 proper. Granted, in more modern games, tutorials still exist as a concept, but they're usually presented in a more natural form these days, with context-relevant tooltips or highly scripted opening sequences. Having things explained by a thick wall of text or by polygonal David Cage is something most people won't miss, although like we saw in the loading screens entry, not every old game did this badly, in fairness. The video game adaptation of Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man movie, for example, featured a very on-the-nose VR-style tutorial level in which a narrator walked you through all of the game's controls and mechanics one by one. So far, so tedious, right? Well, you'd be forgiven for thinking so, but what if I told you that said narrator was voiced by Bruce Campbell, who spends most of the time either chastising you, breaking the fourth wall, or being generally cynical, before telling you halfway through the combat module that he's off to grab a ham sandwich, and then delivering his next set of instructions with his mouth full.
Okay, so here you are on the side of a building. Your next marker is up, so you could crawl.
All I'm saying is that the video game gods didn't make all tutorial levels equally.
Oh, too much money.
Number 7. Quicktime Events. If you fancy a ham sandwich yourself, we're going to have a short break for the next couple of entries while we look at a few features that are admittedly still around, but undeniably far less commonplace, to the point that it didn't feel right to do this list without them. First up, QTEs.
28 stab wounds. You didn't want to leave him a chance, huh?
Quicktime events were once a good way of letting the player have the illusion of control over a character during what was essentially a pre-rendered cutscene, allowing them to perform actions that they wouldn't necessarily be able to carry out via the usual control scheme, like traversing tricky terrain, dodging hazards, or cutting off their fingers. Whether it's a sudden button prompt to test your reactions, or a timed choice giving you a few seconds to decide which direction to go, the QTE was once a staple of gaming up until around the last generation. From Dragon's Lair to Until Dawn, they've been used to great effect from time to time. However, others had less success, repeatedly failing. One hilarious Heavy Rain QTE sequence, for example, results in the player falling and slipping all over a supermarket. Like, continuously. Why does the game let you keep doing this? This is ludicrous. What is going on? Why are we still going? Quicktime events are not entirely obsolete nowadays, but they're used with far more care than they used to be, now featuring more often in what would be described as a scripted moment rather than an interactive cutscene. Gone are the glory days of the true Quicktime event, so hey, F in the chat, ladies and gentlemen. Number 6. Health bars.
A mouth-watering medley of nuts, oats and summer fruits, drizzled with honey and at only 85 calories.
What? Oh, health bars. Oh, I see. Much like QTEs, health bars in games are not totally extinct, but they're certainly harder to find these days, considering they used to be in almost every game ever. Fighting games, of course, are always going to need some kind of health measurement, as well as other games with very complex combat systems. But in the more straightforward action of an FPS, the health bar has mostly been phased out in favour of regenerating health, where the bullets fade away after a few seconds, you know, like in The Mask. This has its benefits. You don't need to go room to room on 1 HP to find that one health pack you missed last time you ransacked the place, but it can also prove annoying to never know exactly how much more damage you'll be able to tank. Then again, it's quite nice to know that if you find some cover and stay there for a while, you'll soon be right as rain. There might even be time while you regen to put down your controller and quickly chow down on a mouth-watering medley of nuts, oats, summer fruits, drizzled with honey, and at only 85 calories. Delicious! Number 5. Password saves. Once upon a time, there was a world in which video game hardware was incapable of allowing players to save and resume their games at will. Even when memory cards and other such technology became commonplace, some titles continued to use archaic means of restoring one's progress, perhaps because they were just too set in their ways. And what were those archaic means? Passwords, of course. Upon reaching what we would now call a save point, the player would be given a unique string of button inputs or letters and numbers, which contained all of the relevant information required to resume the game from that point. This is why the passwords were usually long and complicated. It was essentially encrypted information, so that you couldn't just work out that this number here referred to how many lives you had, or that letter there referred to which levels you'd unlocked, etc, etc. Any player with that sort of power would have been a law unto themselves. Then again, passwords like this weren't unique to individual copies of a given game, so the 100% end game inputs were often shared on cheat code websites, along with the sort of thing we've already talked about. Just as well they're a thing of the past then, really, or I'd probably be tempted all too often by the allure of the cheater Austin inside me. Number 4. Couch co-op. The gradual extinction of split-screen co-op gaming is happening right now, and it hurts.
Oh, I pushed you!
I'm sure almost everyone watching this video has at least one happy memory of playing games with a friend or relative long into the night with all the multiplayer action squashed into one tiny CRT television set. This is very much a case of going, soon to be gone, with some relatively recent titles like A Way Out and Borderlands keeping the plate spinning for the time being. However, games that once featured couch co-op as an absolute staple are gradually dropping the feature bit by bit, simply because video games are now pushing consoles to such limits that it's simply impossible to render two separate perspectives on a single screen. You'd essentially need two consoles for that, hence online gaming. Or do any developers still do System Link? I don't know. This is perhaps one of the saddest losses to modern gaming, and we can only hope that the hardware upgrades of the next generation might allow couch co-op to start creeping back in when the processing power and rendering capabilities have improved. For now though, there's always Overcooked, I guess. Number 3. Silent speech. While intentionally silent protagonists certainly still feature in video games, I seem to mention that caveat in every entry by the way, silent dialogue is now much more rare thanks to technological advancements.
Oh, that's different.
Not so long ago there were dozens of games whose protagonists were very much happy to talk to NPCs, but simply lacked a voice actor. Again, Final Fantasy VII is a notable example here. Nowadays though, it's not just protagonists who speak, but nearly every NPC in most games, which is amazing in and of itself when you compare it to games from the turn of the century, even if it is often just a cut and paste line from the 20 hours of "Huh!" or "Hail, traveller!" or "Have you heard of the High Elves?" that one poor man had to record. It was a huge change for players when protagonist voice acting became a mainstay for gaming. Suddenly that Brooklyn plumber Mario had an Italian accent.
Hello, spaghetti!
Sephiroth sounded like a very bored noir detective, and Link, well, Link is just as silent as ever, but hey, I imagined him saying "yeah" in a totally different way as a kid, so my point still stands. Number 2. Limited lives. No one can live forever, and some games really love to remind us of this fact, even in the virtual world. Restarts, continues, lives, whatever you want to call them, it's bloody stressful watching them count down on you like they do, and if you run out of them, then the game might just boot you all the way back to the start menu. This whole concept is essentially a hangover from arcade games instructing you to insert coin to continue, which, in order to up the difficulty of games and therefore artificially extend the playtime, managed to make it into home gaming. Some games allowed for unlimited restarts, with the fun only ending when you selected such an option on the game over screen, but others just wanted us to suffer, I suppose. Some games still implement this feature, but again, even franchises that have long been home to this feature might be ditching it themselves. Word on the street is that Crash 4 is going to have an alternate difficulty or game mode in which lives don't exist and Wumpa Fruit are effectively just there as collectibles. The life counter will still be there for those who want to play that way, but you know the concept is in trouble when even Crash Bandicoot is moving away from it. Ironically, it seems that the finite life counter itself is heading for a game over.
See, how do you like it?
And number 1, manuals and strategy guides.
Back in my day, you couldn't just go and scream in the YouTube comments section about not being able to beat a level. You had to trek to your local game shop and scream in there until someone threw you out.
Not everyone had an older sibling to hand the controller to when a level got too difficult. Fortunately, whatever the birth order of your siblings, in the 90s you could rest assured that inside the hallowed pages of a strategy guide were all the ways to get around the levels that you found difficult, as well as tips and tricks for tackling the rest of the game from start to finish. Best of all, both the game manuals and official strategy guides often featured lore and other supplementary details that weren't addressed in the game itself. I spent hours poring over all the official in-game names of Spyro 1's enemies, for example, even if some of them were a bit silly. With the increase of digital downloads and companies cutting costs, physical manuals aren't really a necessity anymore, partly because the controls and important information are all viewable in the settings menu already, and meanwhile physical strategy guides have been sadly usurped by online equivalents, with a bunch of YouTube know-alls telling you this and that about the latest release from day one. Just as well really, or I'd be out of a job. And that's our list. But what other examples of forgotten or obsolete video game mechanics do you remember that have now been put out to pasture? And are there any you'd like to see return? Stick them in the comments below. You can follow myself and TripleJump on Twitter here, and if you want to support the things you enjoy, then check out the rewards on our Patreon. Finally, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. I've been Peter from TripleJump, and thanks for watching.